3, 2, 1. All right, welcome back to another episode of Discourse. This week we're going to be going over the history of the Western esoteric tradition. I am Abammon the Great, and I am joined, as always, by the lovely Dr. Anna Stone.
Hi.
Hi. Yeah. So we already recorded this episode before it got a little away from us, and I kind of messed up the audio on it too, so we're re-recording. However, I'm excited to go through this because the history of Western esotericism is something that I am consistently trying to approach and reapproach, because I find that when I'm initiating people or I'm trying to teach them magic, I feel like there needs to be some kind of foundation in why we're utilizing the currents that we're utilizing and why we're avoiding other currents. And it comes down to basically tracing the lineage of ideas that the magical tradition comes from and the occult tradition comes from. However, every time I try to briefly summarize it or make a Cliff Notes version for either somebody that's coming from ground zero or somebody that has absolutely no interest in, learning kind of the cold, dry history of Western esotericism, I find that I'm on a fool's errand. It's nearly impossible to do it. However, I have tried multiple times. There was my first attempt within my book on initiation, and upon finishing the book, I went back and decided that I needed a prologue that gave people a primer to Western esotericism and why the book is a synthesis of Egyptian practice with Kabbalah, with this kind of like Neoplatonic philosophy, and then synthesized with Muslim magic. And then trying to just fit all of that into a prologue was absolutely impossible.
That's so simple.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I was going through it and I was like, what am I trying to do? Like this is insane. This is something that people have specialized careers in, and they spend their entire lives trying to untangle just like a very finite point of the history of Western esotericism,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
Like, so there'll be like a specialist in like, oh, I specialize in, Renaissance esotericism, but specifically within, the Catholic Church, or I specialize specifically in Christian theosophy, which is the Protestant response, Protestant mysticism that was a response to Renaissance. I don't know.
That's a lot.
It's pretty crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, is it so hard to explain it because of the concurrent events going on in history at the time? Like, is that why? Is that part of it? Because you have different cultures doing different things at the same time, though?
Yeah.
Is that hard to...
So basically, the thing is, when you're studying Western esotericism, it kind of opens your eyes to this permeating undercurrent of intellectual history, and it's kind of the rejected intellectual culture that is permeating throughout all of history.
Right.
And so this is largely happening through a process of synthesis and syncretization. That's what kind of inspires ideas in intellectual cultures. It's when two cultures meet and start exchanging ideas. And so when exploring Western esotericism, which is the rejected ideas that did not make it into the mainstream institutions, you're not only having to draw a line of what culture constitutes Western esotericism, but you're also having to draw a line of like, well, is this a garbage idea, or is it just a rejected one?
Yeah, that's interesting, because I'm sure there's both, right? There's some garbage ideas, and then there's just some rejected ones that don't fit the narrative for whatever rejected it, right? So how do you delineate between the two?
That's I basically personally in my practice, I delineate by the fruits of something. Like, I look at what either the people that subscribe to that idea have been able to produce, or what kind of lives they lived.
Okay.
Right. So I look for the fruits of the idea. And if the fruits of the idea are good, then I know that there is some truth in there.
Okay.
If the fruits of the idea are toxic and withered, then I know that whatever that idea is inherently at odds with the greater universal will.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So you look for how the lives of the people that were doing it, how they live them, and then the fruits of their labor, so to speak. Like,
Yeah.
and so how would you verify that?
It's very obvious. There's a reason that I'm so critical of Aleister Crowley and Thelema and OTO, and it's because you look at the fruits of those practices, the types of people that come out of it, and you look at the founder of it themselves, that is very obviously a person, Aleister Crowley, who is completely at odds with himself,
Right. So I understand. Yeah. Okay. So now I understand what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that is reflective of whatever tradition someone's going with. Absolutely. I can see it in my head right now, exactly what you're talking about. And the people in the traditions that I've participated in, those people are the most, like, they exemplify like what I was hoping for, right? But I've been in ones where that's not, like that coven I met in Hollywood, where I was just like, no, this is not for me. But the history, so I'm going to assume that, like how I teach students, like, back when I was teaching science in high school, biology, I know that my students hated it. And I would tell them it's important you have to have the foundational knowledge to learn this, to really appreciate it. But I'm well aware from that experience and just from living in this, current atmosphere that we're in, people don't want to do that work. People don't want to research. They don't want to take time to read about stuff, someone told me I was a boomer for telling them they should read online. I was like, not quite, but okay. But why is it important to understand these, like the history?
Well, so it's so that you're able to filter, bad ideas from good ideas, I guess. So you don't repeat any mistakes. It also helps refine your magical practice. So
it does.
Yes, 100%. So I know that there is a very specific mind in the occult that's really into history and historiography, and the onus or the expectation on every practitioner to have that same kind of obsession is a little ridiculous. But I think it does come down to those practitioners, those magists, those wizards that do have that more comprehensive understanding of the historical realities to at least teach or try to distill it in an authentic way so that people can faithfully practice their magic without running into the many traps that are laid all over the occult. Sometimes it's misinformation and sometimes it's disinformation. The difference between this is misinformation is kind of you don't know what you're saying is misinformation, and then there is disinformation in the occult, which is on intentionally bad information to kind of lead the dummies astray, I guess.
Okay, so to that point, I get it. I get that, but that's just so lowbrow because I feel like there's, again, these safeguards that are just put in place naturally with the occult, like this, what we're talking about right now, how the average person is not going to be about doing the research and understanding the stuff, right? I'm going to say actually that if you're one of those people, you'll get some results, but you're not going to get the same kind of in-depth practice that you would otherwise. But that's okay, because that's maybe not what the path that you're meant to be on anyways. If I feel like those are some of those built-in safeguards, like the need, the purpose of knowing the history behind what you're doing. That just makes sense to me. But a lot of people doesn't, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's on purpose. I think that's just one of those things. Like, so there's no need for disinformation. Because
perhaps.
I mean, I get it. I totally get it. But at the same time, it's like, now you're interfering, like it should be the individual. If the individual's actually doing the work, it's really messed up to give them disinformation.
I think at one time in our history, or for a long part of our history, there were very practical purposes for hiding in symbols and
Sure.
purporting disinformation, and it was really to protect the safety of the author or
Right.
the institution. However, I definitely think that where we stand right now,
No.
the occult is still occulted, but it's occulted by motivation. And so I
That's what I
don't,
mean.
yeah, I honestly don't think that, I don't lay the expectation on people to spend as much time researching the kind of dry, boring details of the occult. However, I think that there is a major importance that people are somewhat familiar with it. I remember in my early years of occultism, looking at trying to trace these threads, and I didn't even know where to begin. It is so overwhelming. And so I hope that my attempts at trying to trace the history of Western esotericism will help guide someone like me into, okay, here's a starting point.
Right.
Maybe explore your practice or yourself a little more here, because through the historical record, as you're tracing the historiography, you start getting in touch with the actual sources, the real sources, the real magic, right?
Right.
It's not your it's not your modern magic like compendium, like modern magic or your Llewellyn Press. It's like, well, where's this coming from? Everything's getting slapped together. You see the roots, you see who Mathers was inspired by, you see who Crowley was inspired by, and you get into the foundational sources, and that's where the real magic is.
Or the real what the heck questions begin, because that was my experience. But I disagree here. I'm going to say something. I'm going to say I disagree with this idea that that we shouldn't expect other people to be as into it. I'm going to say that the practice and utilization of magic is extraordinary, and it requires extraordinary measures from the people that want to practice it. I think that if you're going to actually manipulate energies like that, you should be willing to sacrifice your time and energy to learning about it properly. I don't see a problem with requiring that of somebody. If I was to mentor somebody, and I would be testing them on it, just like I would in one of my college classes. Because how do I know you're legit? I know by the amount of effort you're going to put into it. And also the amount of effort you're going to put into it is going to equally come back to you, as you're demonstrating your worth towards the purpose. Do you know what I'm saying? Why would, if I'm the universe and I'm going to grant certain people the ability to do these things, am I going to pick the one that's half-assing it, or am I going to pick the one that's all about it?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That I always just try to think of it like that. Same with students as a teacher, what effort do I give to my students that need help? I help all of them. But to what extent are the ones that are really, really about it and showing me and showing up are the ones that are going to get the most attention, period. Yeah. And I feel like that is just a kind of universal fact. The more you show up, the more things will happen for you. So I think it's important. I think people don't have the mind capacity and attention span anymore for it. So when you find somebody that's willing to do it, I think that they're worth the effort to help guide them, right? For sure. But I mean, for just a general practitioner that's doing it by themselves or within order, you have no control over that. But I do think I would stress that I think it's really important because, and you said earlier that it also helps you refine your practice. That is so valuable. You go in and you have an idea of what it is, right? Mm-hmm. And if you don't know the history of it, then you have just the idea or whatever you've heard from others. It's not until you read about it and then you find things that you don't agree with and then things you do agree with, and from all over the world, different cultures, different practices, then you can, make your own unique thing out of it, which is far more, I think, impactful than following some other pre-established, you know what I mean? Framework. Does that make sense? What I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think for me personally, I was heavily into ceremonial magic. just because it was so penultimate and so mysterious, and
Yeah, so movie.
I loved the Golden Dawn and A Life with Levi, and just everything ceremonial. It was just so extra, you know.
It's so extra.
Yeah. However, I think one of the most eye-opening things for my occult practice was when I started getting into Arabic magic, but at the same time learning Neoplatonic philosophy. And then once I discovered Neoplatonism and Platonic mysticism, then all of a sudden that kind of liberated ritual and ceremony for me. All of a sudden, I found that all the extravagant ceremonial practices I didn't necessarily need, and my rituals and my environments became my own, and that's where my personal brand of magic was discovered. It was through investigating these primary sources that inspired the great magicians and the great wizards, and understanding on really deep metaphysical level what I was doing with my magic. It wasn't just following a recipe anymore.
Right.
So I guess,
exactly. Yeah. That's how mine is too. Like as a kid, it started off under a framework, a Llewellyn framework, I guess.
Yeah.
But very shortly after, it's always been, since probably young adulthood, it's been my own. Like I will take things here and there from other, as I learn about them, but how do you learn about them unless you study it? So, and that's the thing, unless someone tells you, but then that should prompt you to want to go study it. If you are interested in something someone's saying, go look into it. So I think that curiosity is key when it comes to researching this, but also having patience, because this, like, I know you and I know how thorough you are, and I know how perfectionist you are. It's very similar to how I am. So when I see you struggling to put this together in a nice, wrapped in a little bow, I know that it has to be very difficult, because, and I know that you've tried this a few times, and it's really difficult. It's really hard to get it just in this kind of truncated, concise format, right? Like to just explain it like outright. It's almost impossible. So where do we start?
So that first we have to define what Western esotericism is, right? That's where we first have to start, and that in itself is really difficult. So the problem with defining Western esotericism, first you have to define esoterics, right? So esotericism or esoterics is basically just knowledge that is reserved for a select few. And the way that I personally define it is that knowledge is obfuscated by motivation, right? So anything can be esoteric, right? If you are a chef, and you are into fermentation, that is an esoteric aspect of your craft, right? If you are a musician and you are into modular synthesis, that is an esoteric aspect of your craft. And you can discuss with other esotericists modular synthesis, right? Yeah. But to somebody who's absolutely loved music and their entire life is music, and they have like an amazing record collection, they go to concerts every single weekend, and then they're faced with the guy that's into modular synthesis. Yeah, no idea. Like, it's like, this is somebody that absolutely loves music, but they don't understand the esoterics, because that knowledge is reserved for the guys that are into modular synthesis. Right. Whatever. So
it's like jargon. It's like the industry jargon that we have.
So when we're talking about Western esotericism, we're talking specifically about an intellectual undercurrent that permeates the history of Western civilization, right? And this intellectual undercurrent is not just religious, it's not just scientific, and it's not just philosophical. It participates in all three, and it cannot be categorized within a single one, right? Okay. So it's kind of amorphous. Basically, there's a man, Wouter Hanegraaff, who's at the University of Amsterdam, and he's an academic he's a modern academic. That's probably one of the foremost academics in researching this stuff that's alive today. He specifically specializes in Hermeticism. However, he wrote a book called Western Esotericism Guide for the Perplexed, and when I was writing my History of Western Esoteric lecture series, I was using that book in order to bounce off the timeline that I had constructed. However, I found within his book, there was a ton of stuff I didn't agree with. He never mentioned Satanism. He doesn't count Kabbalah or the developments of Kabbalah or Judaism.
Wait, what?
Yeah, basically his argument is that these are completely insular esoteric systems, which he's right. However, there is a certain point in the development of Western esotericism where you cannot talk about it without talking about the contributions of the Jews and the Muslims, right? Because especially when you're talking about where did all the esotericism go during the Dark Ages, the Muslims had it and they were developing it, right? And then obviously during the Renaissance, all of esoterics gets absolutely obsessed with Kabbalah. So it's like you can't really talk about Western esotericism without talking about the contributions of the Jews and the Muslims.
Absolutely not. Like, absolutely not. Because it might have been insular at one point, but at some point it became shared information that we built that was used to build up all the things that we are talking about now. Like, that's weird. Honograph, like, why?
Well, he's he's a spicy man. A lot of people.
He has a lot of haters, right? He has a lot of people that challenge what he has to say, and that's what what happens when you're an academic and you publish. That's what happens. It's normal. And I would say that, hopefully, I don't know, maybe he can revise that at some point when he discovers it. Because I'm going to assume that that's just because he's not a practitioner. He doesn't not know. I mean, I don't know how much research goes into actually when you're talking about academic research. I don't know how much practical research is going to go into.
I think he specifically specializes in historiography. So basically the lineage of ideas through literature.
So he wouldn't be going and trying to see what's happening currently and then
he's not an anthropologist.
Like that. No. Okay. Yeah. So then that makes sense. All right. So you say it's all of Western civilization.
Yeah. All of Western civilization.
Okay. And you have to, when you can't define really, no one can agree necessarily on the definition of Western esotericism, right?
Yeah. So the problem is the easiest definition that you can go with is that it's just rejected knowledge. Well, which rejected knowledge is that going to be, right? Is flat Earth part of Western esotericism? Is geocentrism a part of Western esotericism? If you go with a definition like that, then all of a sudden you're just including a bunch of absolute garbage that we're just like, no, like this is not part of it. However, like if you're talking about, mystic theology, if you're talking about astrology, that's something that a lot of people still believe in, and we don't see it as a large portion of our civilization does not see it as absolute garbage. And so then that's, even though it's rejected by mainstream science and it's rejected by institutional religion, it is still something that we hold on to. And so it's kind of the undercurrent, or that is a part of Western civilization. It's hovering there and it's constantly interacting with these institutions that keep saying like, no, you're not a part of us. You don't belong here, Right.
Well, I have a definition for it. Like, I mean, I've compiled a few to try to make my one. And that is, it is an umbrella term for a broad set of spiritual, philosophical, and mystical traditions that have developed in the Western world, especially those that emphasize hidden or occult knowledge. But again, now you have to define those things too, right? And it promotes personal enlightenment and transformation, and it encompasses a variety of beliefs and practices, often marginalized or considered to be alternative, that propose as an understanding of reality and the divine beyond conventional religion or science.
Oh, okay.
So that's very vague. Yeah. But that's the best that we can do with the fact that nobody agrees. So, and that's what we have to, like consciousness, similarly, like nobody can really define it. So it makes it hard to study. So I see how it can be hard to, even if you can't define it, how can you study it?
Do a Cliff Notes version.
Right.
So then once we get over into the Western part of Western esotericism, we're talking about under the auspices of Western civilization. So the term Western esotericism is not mean that there is such a thing as Eastern esotericism. That is not a current. There are esoterics within the East and like esoteric traditions. However, the Western and Western esotericism is not. It's not like an antithesis to Eastern esotericism. It's specifically like this is a unique thing that has happened in Western civilization where there's this permeating intellectual undercurrent that of rejected knowledge by the institutions within the West, right?
Right.
So we're talking about Western civilization there, and then you have to kind of, well, what constitutes Western civilization? I have a pretty broad understanding of what constitutes Western civilization that you tend to disagree with. Yeah.
I mean, only the one part. Just
The one part.
Just the one, because that's because, and again, this is maybe my filter, my programming from being in school for so long, is that's what I was taught.
Yeah.
So, and that as we all should know by now, that what they teach us is not necessarily true. So, perhaps I fell for that. I'm not sure. But I would need to research that myself because, but let's tell us, what is where's your beginning?
I start Western civilization with the first civilization in Mesopotamia. So that would be the Sumerians, right? And Uruk. So that's the oldest as we know right now, the oldest civilization.
Right.
The first. So I started in Mesopotamia in the Near East. The reason that I do this is because if you look at the institutions that Western civilization holds dear, like Abrahamism, if you look at the types of astrology that we use, or our calendars, our writing systems, they all come from the Near East, right? Even the idea and concepts of legal codes come from Mesopotamia, right? Yeah. So I would say that a lot of what we hold as a part of Western civilization, it was given to us by the Mesopotamians. So I think within the Western esoteric literature, you'll see even in antiquity that in order to gain credence for their writings, the Greek philosophers, like if you look at Pythagoras, they would point that Pythagoras studied with the Chaldeans, which are the Babylonians, the Indians, right? And the Egyptians. Right. So this is something that even what you like to say, and I think what a lot of other people like to say, is that Western civilization has to come from the Greco-Roman Empire, right? It has to come.
That's what we were taught.
Yeah. So the concepts of kind of a republic and a democracy, and how like that empire was organized, and then everything within that empire, once that evolved, that's what constitutes Western civilization. I say that it starts earlier than that. Abraham was from Ur, right? And a lot of what we think of in Western civilization is filtered through an Abrahamic filter. Like those are the religions of the West, right? So
okay, so you're looking back at the roots of the movement,
ideas.
Idea, right? That makes that makes sense, and that's in that case, then sure, I'll concede.
So I include the Near East and North Africa in Western civilization,
Okay,
and you see that really happen in Hellenism, which is, I think, if you want to, for all intents and purposes, want to put a flag in the ground and say this is where Western esotericism starts, is going to be in Hellenism, right? And Hellenism is from 323 BCE to the Roman Empire in about 31 BCE. This is basically Alexander the Great, who is a student, my favorite person that's ever lived. Alexander the Great, he is a student of Aristotle. Aristotle is a student of Plato, and Plato is a student of Socrates. And this is the Socratic lineage right here, right? So Alexander the Great, he is not a philosopher. No, he is a conqueror, but he was a part of the Socratic lineage. He learned from the Socratic lineage. And so what he does is he goes out and he conquers the entire known world. at that point.
So
He
crazy.
makes it all the way out to India, where he dies, right?
Right.
That's around 323 BCE. And then this whole world that he conquered, it splits off into three parts, right? You get like Ptolemaic Egypt, you get the Persian Empire under Hellenism, then you get Rome over here. It's three of his generals, they're all battling for control of the empire, and it splits into three, right? And then what happens after that is Rome goes on to succeed and take over everything, right?
Yeah.
So that's the Greco-Roman Empire. But that process of him conquering the entire known world, as far as the West is concerned, right? Obviously, he wasn't in China or the Americas. However, this is the first time that the world has seen this globalization happen. And because Alexander was taught by the Socratic lineage, I think that he was a lover of wisdom, and that's why he approached his conquering the way that he did. See, Alexander was one of the first conquerors, if not the first, to, instead of destroying and eliminating the culture and trying to assimilate the cultures that he conquered, instead he said, I'm going to let you guys do what you're going to do. Just give me all your wisdom. Give me all your intellectual culture. And so then this overarching Greek hegemony happens, that all these different cultures are able to communicate through, right? And this is where the process of syncretization starts happening. This is how the Egyptian gods get fused with the Greek gods, and the philosophy of the Persians makes it over to the Greeks, and everybody kind of starts collaborating at this period over this kind of global Hellenistic culture.
Yes.
And I think this is where we say this is ground zero for Western esotericism.
I think this is also ground zero for the confusion that it brings, because there's so many times, and myself included, where I've been researching something and I'm like, wait a minute, that's the same kind of idea or quality that this other, concept has in this other, practice. But, that's because it's, okay, I see, it has been assimilated, like out, like, so that's, and I think it confuses a lot of people.
It does. And historically it's confused a lot of people, right? I think the big melting pot is this period, right? And this is where all the webs get tangled, and following the threads here is really difficult. Like who influenced who, what idea came from where,
who's first, which one's the original, which one's the predecessor. That is trouble. That's problematic. They just had this discovery over in Turkey, right? This temple to Hecate, or Hecate, however you want to say it. And that's now predating everything else. So it's like, wait, how's that? Do you know about that? Yeah. Like, so that's predating what the original time was. So, and to make it more, and to compound the problem, the more discoveries are made, the more complicated I'm sure it's going to become, as it has been. Because, every time they discover something else in antiquity, it's like, oh, we had that wrong, or the dates were off, or this is earlier than what we thought, and so I'm pretty sure that it's going to keep going in that manner.
It's constantly changing. It's always evolving and changing. And I think that's like one of the exciting things about being a magus or a wizard or a magical practitioner right now. It's that you have access to information that the greats before you didn't, and it's constantly changing.
So much information. It's kind of one of those things that if you sit and think about it for a moment, it's pretty wild to think that we have all of it that we have existing now, at least that we're aware of. We can't access it in one way, shape, or form, and maybe we have to wait for it to be translated, but it's still there. And like, that was not a possibility back in the day, right?
Yeah.
That's amazing. So what about the Hellenistic period and Greece and Rome and Egypt? What is it? What do we take from that?
So I think the big things to emerge from Hellenism, obviously the Greek intellectual culture, And that's why even after the Greeks lose their dominance, their intellectual culture is still perpetuated by the Romans. That's why we have terms like Greco-Roman, Greco-Egyptian,
Right.
that kind of thing. It's because this intellectual culture far outlasted any kind of military or state dominance that the Greeks had,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, we still use it to this day in academia, right? Like we still use their ideas just for discovering information.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And having discourse and such. Yes.
So I think the big things to emerge out of it, it's really important to understand just how influential Plato was on basically everything that emerges out of this period.
Okay.
So Plato, he starts in, I think he's born in like 428 BCE.
Okay.
And then he dies in about 348 BCE. But Plato, he speaks on a lot of different things. He's mostly concerned with like he's concerned with ontology and epistemology or whatever, but I think his mystical ideas are the ones that get infused into what concerns the Western esotericists. And so his mystical ideas specifically pertain to his theory of forms, right? And the theory of forms is basically that there are these perfect essential ideas that everything participates in. And this becomes important later on in the line. But the problem with Greek philosophy is that is an entirely different beast, an entirely different animal, and it is so influential on magic and Western esotericism. But the second you step into it, you're done. You're never going to hit the bottom, right?
Right.
So it's never going to hit the bottom, but it does help to understand it a little bit. However, there is, following Plato around, there's this idea called Oriental Platonism, which basically Oriental Platonism is this kind of mythologizing of Plato that they say that the people around this time, and this goes on into the Renaissance, they basically say Plato got his ideas from the learned ascended masters in Egypt and in the Chaldees, and then they also point to him and they say that he was a secret Pythagorean. You can see Pythagorean ideas pop up within his mysticism and his metaphysics, right? So he doesn't necessarily teach mysticism. He teaches metaphysics that speaks to mystics, right? Okay. So the mystics really like his metaphysics. And so people kind of point and they say, well, he was a secret mystic and he has secret teachings and he learned them from the ascended masters. And this is called Oriental Platonism. And this is a mythologizing of Plato that goes well into the Renaissance. Okay. So now that we've covered this foundational, like Plato's metaphysic,
what are his ideas though? What are they?
Well, the big one is the theory of forms, right? Or the problem of universals. That's what they call it in modern philosophy. So basically, he talks about a monism or whatever. So basically, there's like one, the one. Okay, and this becomes important later on in the line. However, I think when you're talking about his theory of forms, the best way to describe this is magicians like to use it to kind of lend credence to correspondences, I guess. So within the theory of forms is basically like there is out there in the realm of ideas, there's floating an ideal perfect flower, and every physical flower participates in that perfect ideal. But the flower itself exists within the material and is subject to decay, so it's therefore imperfect. However, when you see the flower, you know that the flower is participating in this eternal perfect idea of a flower. So because the material is subject to decay, everything here is kind of imperfect and is participating in these eternal ideas. So if you can take that with a flower, then everything must be participating in one thing, right? And so there is a eternal one that everything is participating in. And this is kind of the metaphysics behind monism, right?
Sounds like quantum also, some like the simulation, this collective generated simulation theory, like where everybody's participating and creating our reality around us at all times.
Kind of, yeah.
That's kind of what it's reminding me of.
It's like a logic chopping process. Right. Basically, like it's an ontological logic chopping process. It's like what it means to be, right? What is being? And being is just, it's one. It's being, like once you really get down to the core of it, everything else is true. Kind of illusory. Right. So
it is.
I mean, we're getting into. Yeah. I was trying really hard not to step into this.
Sorry. Okay.
No. So, it's fine.
It's so hard. Like you said, it's a fool's errand. But we're going to continue.
This idea is really important because this is the idea that kind of permeates into everything that comes out of Hellenism, right? So the three major movements that constitute the primary interest of the Western esotericist, the magician, the occultist, are going to be Hermetism, right, which is the name that academics give to Hermeticism when they're talking about the historical monistic philosopher religion that was based. It is a very pragmatic philosopher religion that emerged out of Egypt, right, and was a Thoth cult.
Yeah.
Gnosticism, which is basically what happens when all these Hellenes get a hold of Platonic mysticism. They take it a little bit too far and they start fusing it with Abrahamism, right? Okay. So Gnosticism isn't a singular religion.
Right.
It is just everything that is not a part of the institution is getting attacked by polemics, but is influenced by this Platonic philosophy. Mm-hmm. And then Neoplatonism. And Neoplatonism is where we get... is basically a bunch of late Platonists that ran with Plato's metaphysics and decided to develop it into a system of mysticism that we now know as theurgy, which is this kind of like emphasis on becoming either one with God or becoming a god or, your divine alchemy. Yeah. So these three currents are extremely important to everything that becomes Western esotericism, and they all emerge around the same time in the same area, and they're all exposed to each other, right? They're all bouncing ideas off of each other and influencing each other. So
I find that fascinating. So it's like emergent among different cultures at the same time?
Yes. Well, would you constitute them different cultures? If Hermetism is being developed in Greco-Roman Egypt, right? Yeah. And Gnosticism is being developed just, 500 miles away? Yeah, exactly.
But that's to us, maybe that's a short period because of how we live now. But back then, that would be pretty separated, wouldn't it? Just in distance. I don't know how fast word traveled, but
they were writing books to each other, engaging in polemics with each other, and so they're attacking each other's ideas, but they're also adopting each other's ideas, and these ideas are evolving, right?
Right.
And this is happening at the same time that Judaism is kind of evolving and taking off. So it's its own state. So if you're talking about the Roman occupation, right? And this is what happens with Gnosticism. If you talk about the Roman occupation, so Judaism is entering its rabbinic period, okay? And so with Roman occupation, the Jews in Judea are extremely pissed off. The Romans are there.
Right.
And they're trying to reconcile, like, why don't we have our own state? Why do we keep getting kicked out of our own state? They didn't really have a developed sense of good versus evil. Right.
Yeah, that's right.
Until the Roman occupation. And so the Roman occupation, they're really trying to like figure out like, why has God forsaken us? Right. Yeah. So Judaism, before rabbinic Judaism, was very much like, it was very much about ritual. I mean, you're talking about Deuteronomy, Leviticus, these kind of things. It is a very ritualistic, like, we have to do this to appease our God and that kind of stuff. And then the Roman occupation happens, and then all of a sudden it turns into, well, there's a good God, and there's and there's evil in the world, and we need to like, conquer evil. And so this is this development in Abrahamic thought is called apocalypticism, right? And so all of a sudden, running around the Levant, there are a bunch of apocalyptic preachers running around and saying, like, look, there's evil in the world, and there's pure good, and God is good, and we need to vanquish evil, and anybody that's evil is going to get theirs, right?
Yeah.
Well,
So crazy.
amongst these preachers, one specific apocalyptic preacher emerges. His name is
Jesus.
Jesus Christ, right?
Jesus.
And
Yes.
he's all about this good and evil and being right, like being right with God and being good and that kind of thing. And obviously, he kicks off an entire revolution. So inspires a lot of people. But at the same time, we see what's happening with the Gnostics, and the Judea during this time were was a Jewish ruling class that was taking orders from Rome, and this Jewish ruling class was in charge of a bunch of Hellenistic peasants, right? So, this is just a really weird culture to exist in. This is how we get Gnosticism, because we have a bunch of Hellenes that, like Hellenists, that, are very much familiar with this kind of like Greek intellectual thought. You're talking about kind of Plato's metaphysics that have been introduced a few hundred years earlier, right? And as to supplant the ancient, like Homeric kind of Greek mythology. And they're being ruled by these Jews and getting exposed to Abrahamism. And then all of a sudden there's this Christ guy and this Christian cult that starts up, and they're talking about salvation.
Hanging out with lepers and prostitutes. Yeah.
And so this is how we get Gnosticism. And if you're familiar with Plato's cosmology and his metaphysics, then all of a sudden the Gnostic cosmology makes sense. The Gnostic cosmology is Platonic metaphysics on crack.
Yeah.
It's insane. Whereas like Plato wasn't necessarily pissed off that the material world exists. The Gnostics, really pissed off about it. This kind of divorce of like, there's the old God and there's the Old Testament God and he's a bad God.
Yeah.
And then the New Testament God's a good God. This is under the influence of Zoroastrianism, which is a dualistic monotheism that the Jews got exposed to once Persia became a part of Hellenism, right? So all of a sudden, this like apocalyptic strain is not just creating Christianity, but it's also inspiring, these Hellenists that are kind of fascinated with what's going on with Abrahamism and think that it's, some high-powered Jew magic that they want to get their hands on, So, So there's a lot that's happening here, and they're all influencing each other. And the Christians, the thing is, every single one of these traditions, they have these great myths or lineages that they can point to, and they can be like, we are an ancient people. This is an ancient tradition, right? The Jews, they're considered an ancient tradition. The Hellenists, they can point to their old gods and like, we've been doing this for forever, right? The Christians don't have that, and they're getting kind of made fun of by everybody else. They're like,
I mean, I can imagine, like now that happens, new stuff pops up and you're like, what is that nonsense over there? Yeah. So, I mean, but I'm hearing this thing you said without saying it, but you did, is that before the Roman occupation, there was no good and bad. So there was no heaven and hell.
It wasn't as developed. There was no heaven and hell.
Right.
No,
so
for sure. No, well, I mean, the heaven and hell thing is way
I know.
This.
Oh, I'm very aware.
Yeah.
But I mean, just so that anybody that doesn't know who might be watching. So prior to that, there was no concept of good and bad because people hadn't behaved that way yet. I'm not sure.
No, it's not that there was no concept of good and bad. It's that the religion was not about that.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what you're saying then is that the events of the experiences of the people then morphed the religious beliefs of the people to include
how the religion was engaged in, right? And that's when it became a kind of like dual, like there are evil forces in the world that, you know, God is good and God is going to vanquish the evil forces and that kind of stuff. Religion was not about that before. It was very, it was
individual,
like ritualized, you know, ancient religion, you know, it was about appeasing Yahweh.
I just feel like that's important for people to know because so many people just cling to that so much, but that's a concept that's created out of desperation from the people that didn't understand what was happening.
Yeah, so it was definitely a coping mechanism, especially with the destruction of the Second Temple.
Right.
The destruction of the Second Temple really kicked off a lot of cope within the Gnostics and within the Jews about like how could God let this happen? Right.
It does not compute. It is not congruent with what our belief is currently. So we have to modify it.
So there must be evil and
interesting. I just think that that's important for people to know because again, this is not something.
And that's kind of like what the Book of Revelations was written about. It was the Book of Revelations was largely a response to the destruction of the Second Temple, right? It's basically like, this is what's going to happen to you, Rome, for what you did to the Second Temple. And this largely why I don't think the Book of Revelation should be considered canon.
I love that book. It's my favorite. It's so dramatic.
It does not fit within the Bible.
It's not the tone at all.
You know, like the Old Testament, it's like, different tone than the New Testament or whatever. But then you get to Revelations and you're like, it's like
a freaking soap opera.
It's Gnostic drivel.
Yeah,
Gnostic drivel. It does not vote. Like, if it was my Bible, that book's out. Dude, that's not canon.
This isn't this King James? When did it get added? Do you know?
I have no idea. Yeah. So
I know King James, who, you know, the Bible we now have, right, is that version, and he was a demonologist.
That's a bad. I don't like that Bible.
Well, I know you don't like that Bible. That's the most common one, I think.
I think that's the most common one for Protestants. For Protestants, it's kind of the gold standard, but I don't think for theology,
probably not. No.
Like academics, no.
I would hope not, but I do find it funny. I don't know how many people know that King James at first was a demonologist beforehand.
Of course,
so
obviously,
I know that we know that, but I'm saying that most people that are not into the occult do not know that. So it's funny to me. So what happens between the period that we're in now with the Neoplatonism and stuff, right?
So after that, we're gonna
medieval.
So we're around this like mass of confusion of. I didn't talk much about Hermeticism, but that's okay. Just know that it emerges from this period,
right?
But so a little after this, as Gnosticism is dying out, that's when Neoplatonism is kind of coming up, and it's coming up in Plotinus, who is the founder of the Neoplatonic school. He writes, or he doesn't necessarily write it. He has a student, Porphyry, who helps edit it and publish it for him. But the Enneads, and that is like the foundational Neoplatonic. That's what kicks off the Neoplatonic school or whatever. So Plotinus has his student Porphyry. Porphyry is Plotinus's editor, and then Iamblichus, he writes a response to Porphyry, right? And this is called On the Mysteries of the Chaldeans, Assyrians, and Egyptians.
Yeah.
And this is considered the masterpiece of theurgy. It's the closest we can get to theurgy, right? So nobody actually knows how theurgy is practiced. And the Neoplatonists, they seem to not, or at least Plotinus doesn't like ritual. He actually doesn't like going to the gods. He believes that the gods are supposed to come to him. However, then you get to people like Iamblichus, and Iamblichus is kind of hinting that there is a process to it, but at the same time, he's also saying that in order to perform the mystic theurgy, the only thing that you need is a heartfelt prayer and doing it at the right time. So I think that Iamblichus is hinting that within the process of theurgy, there is an astrological component or whatever.
Right, it sounds like it.
So when you're trying to dig through the original Neoplatonists, you're trying to figure out exactly what theurgy is. is pretty hard. Nobody can actually reconstruct the practice. People will point at alchemy. They'll point at trying to reconstruct some kind of like ascetic Platonic practice as theurgy. It can be anywhere from hypnosis to, becoming the god yourself. It's a pretty difficult thing to reconstruct. I would say, though, there are some, I'm not going to say names. I'm going to keep them to myself. They're my own personal treasures.
Okay.
However, there are some modern people, I think, that are getting pretty close to the practice. But yeah, so after Iamblichus, we have Proclus, who writes Elements of Theology, and Elements of Theology is a pretty important Neoplatonic piece. So I think Neoplatonism, I think it's almost more important to Western esotericism and occultism than Hermeticism is. I feel like Hermeticism is very important, right? That is the framework from which we get the occult sciences like alchemy, astrology. However, I think in practice, when you look at what you're performing and the transformation that the Magus is going through, it kind of all comes from Neoplatonism. And you see Neoplatonism kind of bleed into all mysticism from in every single Western religion. So if you know Neoplatonism and you look at Kabbalah, it makes sense. If you know Neoplatonism and you look at Sufism, it makes sense. If you know Neoplatonism, you look at alchemy, it makes sense. All of a sudden, with that Neoplatonic framework, you can decode these mystic practices, and it works on some of the Eastern practices too.
Right.
Like Neoplatonism is very in line with how most of the world's mystics work, and it's that mystic ascent, right?
And he came up with this stuff, or like these things came. How is it alleged that it was transmitted to Plato?
Plotinus? Oh, to Plato?
Yeah.
So Plato was inspired by Parmenides. The mythology says that he was a Pythagorean, though. Mm-hmm. And then Pythagoras is supposed to have learned it from the Egyptians, the Chaldeans, and the Persians.
And then those are getting a direct source? Where does it come from?
That's the thing. It's like every time you get down to the source, they're like,
pointing somewhere else.
They point somewhere else. And it's like, oh, we learned this from the Egyptians,
Sounds like a classic game of, skirting the responsibility.
For your own ideas.
Yeah. Because people don't like that. People like to hear that there's
the mythology,
some history behind what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Interesting. So, okay. So, all right. So now, like what time frame are we in right now?
Okay, so Neoplatonism is like the 3rd to 7th century, right? So Gnosticism's fizzled out. Christianity is becoming the state religion of the Roman Empire. And within this, the Gnostics are getting killed because the Christians are... Sorry, I meant that metaphorically. They'll get killed literally later down the timeline, but at this point, metaphorically through literary debates,
Got it.
Yeah, they won't actually go
and
start killing them like physically until a few hundred years later. But but they're getting destroyed in literary debates as the Christians because once again they're getting made fun of. They're getting dunked on by all these other ancient traditions. Yes. And so they have to solidify their identity as their own religion. And so they're writing these polemical pieces that are like basically turning other Christian cults into heretical Gnostics. It's like, well, you are influenced by Plato. Like, this is a Platonic idea right here. So this actually isn't out of the Bible. So you're not a part of the Christian orthodoxy.
Thus begins the persecution complex of the Christians.
So the Christianity's identity, it is in rejecting the ideas of Plato, like 100%. Trying to get rid of that, and you're going to see throughout Christian history, especially early Christian history, Plato's ideas will get into Christianity, and then some people will realize it and try to kick it out, but then other ideas will keep evolving with it. They're intrinsically linked, but Christianity's identity is is formed off of trying to get rid of all the pagan crap, getting it out.
Those heathens, right? Yeah. Like
however, when you're looking at like Trinitarianism, the Council of Nicaea, that's when Plato is like, oh, well, Plato can support our theology. They don't do that consciously, though. They're not consciously aware that they're borrowing Plato's metaphysics when they're using it to build their theology. However, I think maybe Augustine.
I think so. I feel like someone did, but they just didn't say
Augustine
anything.
was aware, and then there's Pseudo-Dionysius, and Pseudo-Dionysius was subversive. He was intentionally injecting Platonic metaphysics into Christianity in order to preserve Platonism.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So you had your double agent in there.
Yeah, he's kind of a badass, totally. But so I guess you're gonna look at Western esotericism from Hellenism. There's basically three things that come out of this: is astrology, alchemy, and magic. Right? These are the big things that concern the Western esotericist or the magician that comes from all these cultures interacting with each other. And so magic is basically you're harnessing hidden forces and occult correspondences between the material and the cosmos. And this is where Hermeticism comes into play, because Hermeticism is largely dealing with those occult correspondences. Hermeticism is the strain, the philosopher religion that comes out of this, that is basically justifying the correspondences, and it's what's pushing forward medicine during this time, alchemy, astrology, basically the more scientific parts of this, but it's under the auspices of this kind of philosopher monistic religion.
Okay.
Then obviously we have astrology and alchemy. So after this period, though, as Christianity is trying to get rid of all this pagan crap in Europe. They're like, get it out of here. We don't like this.
Right.
We're our own thing, guys. Like, take us seriously.
And you can't, and nothing else can exist.
Yeah. So during this time, some new rock stars enter the scene.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who were they?
My boys, down on the Arabian Peninsula.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. They're basically like the medieval Beatles, except a lot bloodier,
a lot more brutal, vicious.
A lot more brutal, a lot bloodier, a lot more sexual assault. So but I mean, they conquer the entire world, and they do it like really quickly, and it's kind of amazing. So the first caliphate doesn't last too long. They immediately, after Muhammad dies, they immediately start fighting. This is the first division. So the first caliphate kind of dies, and everybody's fighting for power. But then this caliphate gets installed, the Abbasid Caliphate, and these are the guys that we're talking about when we talk about the golden age of Islam, right? Okay. So the Abbasid Caliphate kind of operate under, even though they're conquerors and emperors, they're an empire, right? They operate under the same philosophy as Alexander the Great, which is, we're going to conquer you, but you're going to pay us, but give us all your intellectual treasures, your spiritual treasures.
This is the way to do it, man.
Yeah, exactly.
You gotta if you're gonna rape and pillage, you better make sure that you rape and pillage the knowledge too, and the secret magic stuff.
We want to learn your secrets, and so something very beautiful is happening in the Abbasid Caliphate. While Europe is completely trying to get destroy all its traditions, destroy all of its lineages in the name of Christ. Right.
Yep.
Something beautiful is happening in the caliphate where they're like, no, like we'll take it and we'll work on it. Right. Yeah. So something really interesting happens. So Aristotle and Plato's metaphysics are diametrically not diametrically opposed, but pretty opposed. Right. So whereas Plato believed in this world of forms as this like eternal world or whatever that matter participated in, Aristotle believed that the world of the forms themselves, they could not exist without matter. So they were intrinsically linked with each other, right?
Okay.
So something interesting happens right now within the Abbasid Caliphate, where they get a hold of a copy of the Enneads by Plotinus, who is a Neoplatonist. He is a mystic that ran with Plato's metaphysics and systematized it. And they think that this is Aristotle. They call it the theology of Aristotle. And then they also do have a little bit of Aristotle's literature too.
Okay.
So they're a little confused here, but they somehow figure out how to make Aristotle and Plato's metaphysics work with each other while pushing forward alchemy and Hermeticism, right? And so they're bringing these three things together. And then after they've brought these things together and they're advancing their science, they're known for their mathematics. That's what the big contributions that they made. Whereas like the Pythagoreans, they had this cute little number mysticism. It's like one is the monad, you know. The Muslim guys had this like magic square that they were plugging formulas in, and like, and this is why this is Allah. And it was just like, it was just so much more than, you know, numbers mysticism.
Thanks, guys,
like,
for those complicated
it was
equations.
Amazing. No, they were writing algorithms to do this. It was amazing. But so after they've successfully fused these three things together by accident, then they go and they put it into Islam, and they're like, okay, how do we reconcile this with Islam? So not only have they put together Aristotle and Plato, right? Pushed forward their own philosophy, fused it with Hermeticism, but now they've made it work with Abrahamism, right? Which is a really big deal.
Well, yeah, because that's the opposite of what Christians did, right? Like they just bulldozed everything and said no, instead of taking a moment to like see if they could incorporate it. Well, besides the subterfuge that happened within the councils and stuff, right? Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so I like that. I like that vibe of like at least considering it, or you know, using it to their advantage.
Well, yeah, no, they pushed it forward. So it's like all of Western esotericism. There was a broken lineage, right? So it's like when the you know, like when Europe entered the Dark Ages, all of a sudden Western esotericism, like during Christianization, and then we entered the Dark Ages, and then Western esotericism disappears from Europe. Where was it? Where did it go? Huh?
Underground?
No, the Muslims had it, and they didn't just have it; they were taking it farther. They were pushing it, right? Yeah. And this is why I include the Near East as a part of Western civilization, and it's also why I say that we would not have Western esotericism. We would not have any of our intellectual culture if it wasn't for the Muslims. So we need to look at our Muslim brothers, at least in this period of time. I mean, like, thank you, because we would have lost our entire history, our entire intellectual lineage if it wasn't for them.
Oh, I feel like it's like the Mormons now with our lineage, or, you know, ancestry.
Yeah, I know. God, I love those Mormons. They're
I know.
Amazing. Yeah.
It's like the same thing, just different, you know. It's that taking that responsibility. So that is interesting. That happened. I like that they didn't just toss it out.
No, they didn't. No, they synthesized it, syncretized it, and they made it work. And they did it in a way that nobody had done before, and nobody's been able to do since, right? It's absolutely beautiful. So after that, though, something very important happens. There is the fall of Toledo in Spain, which is basically when the Muslims get kicked out, or they no longer own the Iberian Peninsula, and it becomes owned by the Holy Roman Empire. Like, there's a Christian king. It's a Christian Spanish king, right? Okay. And he's trying to at first, Spain is trying to let the Muslims, the Jews, and the Christians all live together in Spain. But but actually, the Jews and the Muslims didn't do anything this time. It was
I'm sure.
Yeah. It was the Christians that fucked this thing up.
That's that kid that gets everyone's recess ruined for them. Yeah.
So finally, the king comes along in 1492.
Oh wow!
And he gets he's like, you know what? I've had enough of these Jewish guys. They need to get the fuck out of here.
Why Wait, they weren't the ones causing the problem? Wait,
Like, look, we are a nice Christian country. We're gonna get these Jewish guys out of here. And they're like, what?
Wait, again?
Again.
We didn't even do it this time.
Oh god, it's horrible, dude. So horrible. Yeah. So the Jewish expulsion happens, and those Jews, these are called the Sephardic Jews. So they've been living with these Muslims, commingling with them, and they get kicked out of Spain, and they trudge over to northern Italy. Like, well, guess what?
Hi.
We're your problem now.
Yeah.
You got Spain to thank for this. But I guess like 40 years earlier, 1453. There's the conquest of Constantinople, right? That's when the Byzantine Empire falls.
Yeah.
And the Muslims take over Constantinople. So on both ends of the empire, like stuff's happening with the Muslims, and everybody makes it. All this Islamic literature makes its way to northern Italy. From the west, once the Jews arrive in northern Italy, and from the east, basically, once the Muslims start rushing in, and then we land. There's this guy Plethon, basically. Plethon, he comes from Constantinople, and he's got all these amazing things to say. He knows Plato, he knows Aristotle, and he like really impresses the royal families up in northern Italy. But he's an Oriental Platonist, so he's very much perpetuating that myth that Plato can summon thunderbolts from the sky, and he learned it from the Persians. Plethon's but anyways, he impresses the royal families here in northern Italy with his knowledge of these lost European wizards, basically. And then once Plato's Republic makes it into northern Italy with the conquest of Constantinople, the Corpus Hermeticum makes it to Italy.
Right.
These royal families, they commission this guy, Marsilio Ficino, who is a priest in northern Italy. They commission him to translate Plato and the Corpus Hermeticum. And so as Marsilio Ficino was translating these two books, he's starting to realize, he's like, this is really interesting. This looks a lot like what we learn in the church, or what we talk about in the church. So Marsilio Ficino, he doesn't have an understanding of history. He doesn't have the perspective of history that we do right now.
Right.
He doesn't know that these things were interfacing with each other, interacting with each other, polemicizing with each other. To him, these were completely exotic, ancient strains of knowledge. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
So for him, seeing these things talking about the same kind of monism, or the same metaphysical presuppositions that he can also see kind of coded into the church's theology because of its long history interfacing with these strains. He doesn't know this, and so he develops this idea called the Prisca Theologia.
Right.
And the Prisca Theologia basically states that there was one ancient religion, one true religion handed down from God to man, and that over time it was obfuscated and splintered into the different world's religions and philosophies, right?
Okay.
And so this becomes kind of the obsession of the Renaissance, man. They're like the Prisca Theologia. They're like, look at all these. Well, so they've rediscovered Plato. They've rediscovered Hermeticism. And, there's all these Jewish guys that are like hanging out here in like northern Italy. And then they learn that they've got this thing called Kabbalah. And they're like, why didn't you? And then
because you didn't ask.
Yeah, exactly.
You just kept kicking us out.
Yeah, you just kept kicking us out.
We never had time.
Yeah, it's like why would
we share it with you now?
Yeah.
Like no.
So, and Kabbalah is Jewish Neoplatonism, basically, right? So once again, they're looking down at something like. And then this is saying the same thing,
Yeah.
And so it's just reaffirming these Renaissance guys' belief that, not only is there one world religion, they're all connected, one thread, but they're using this as justification for why the church is right or why Christianity is right.
I love that.
And so they're getting really, really excited, okay? And so they're rediscovering all this lost pagan, heathen wisdom.
Forbidden stuff.
Yeah, this forbidden stuff. And then they're going to the Catholic Church and like, look, guys, like, this is amazing. Like, we should start doing this. Well, okay, so... part of the Catholic Church is cool with this. Part of them is like, wow, like this, like you can make this, you know, this is bolstering our theology. And then there's other people within the church that are like, what the hell are you guys doing? Like, like we have fought so hard to keep this crap
burning you alive
out of the church
at 6 p.m. tonight.
Exactly.
Yes. Yes.
So
come one, come all. Let's see what happens when you do
this. So
this.
these people become Protestants. They're like, if it's not in this book, you know, none of that, like, this is all pagan crap, and you can't bring this into the church. You can't bring this into Christianity. If it doesn't come straight from this book that
we wrote,
it's pagan, it's pagan bullshit, you know, and you need to keep it out of the church. And this is where the concept of sola scriptura comes from, and this is where the Protestants. Well, it's like really funny because very quickly after this happens with the Protestants, all of a sudden they start running around with their own esotericism and eating each other, you know.
Yeah.
So they splinter off into, and this is really the story of Christianity, as it starts off like trying to like really define itself by engaging in polemics against competing religions and cults, and it finally gets to a point where it's literally just Christians tearing each other apart. And like, you're not a real Christian. Well, you're not a real Christian. You're not a real Christian.
And I swear there's something in the Bible about being righteous. I don't know. I swear there is. And it's like this desire to be right all the time is, I thought, not a good trait. Yet this is the main thing that persists to this day, is that they're the right religion. And it's funny to me. But the Protestants are the ones. Okay. Makes sense. That's why there's so much more mysticism within the other factions of Christianity than there is, well, more traditional, like, you know, Catholicism and stuff, right? Like, compared to Protestants, they live in fear constantly.
Yeah.
That's, sounds very taxing and exhausting, you know, of a existence. And also dangerous. But what happens after that? After they splinter off? Like, what's the next thing?
Basically, I mean, this is how that whole thing of like the Catholic Church is pagan starts, right? This is where
that's what I mean. That's exactly what I'm saying.
This is why the you know, you talk to a Protestant today,
they think that it's evil. I've heard people literally tell me it's evil.
It stems from this, and it's because mostly people are unfamiliar with the history, and they're unfamiliar with like how intellectual ideas evolve. Right?
That's an understatement. Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically, we were watching something earlier tonight, and it was a group of scientists that were like, look, this is how scientific ideas progress. Like, we have an idea, then we debate with each other, and we decide what...
It fails, it succeeds, whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah, we go forward.
Yeah, exactly. This is how theology worked at one point. This is how it's supposed to work. This is how any intellectual, like, philosophy, theology, these things were collaborating with each other and developing each other. And that's why we have the religious expressions that we have today.
Yeah.
However, people are so unfamiliar with how intellectual culture evolves. All they can do is they can point at the Catholic Church and they can say, that's pagan, because at one point the Catholic Church or the Church Fathers were interfacing with pagans to figure out their theology.
But all I'm hearing from all this, and I know this has nothing to do with the occult, but all I'm hearing from all this is that it's just all man-made. It's not like, this is what people say is this divine, like, concept of religion is not that. It's man-made and evolved over time by bits and pieces of people adding to it or taking away from it.
So you can take it that way if you want. Right. For me, what I personally see, and from my perspective at seeing how all these things evolve, like who is interfacing with who, from my perspective, what I see is the entirety of mankind over space and time working together to reach towards the height of spiritual expression.
That's a very lofty, lovely idea, like lovely spin on it. That's crazy. Like people just killing each other. They're working together. I mean, I get it, but I think that what I mean when I say that is like the people today that are just like, this is the right thing and this is from God directly. You know how people say that. This is direct from God, whatever. It's in the Bible. How? Like that just always has perplexed me. And but you're right. It's because of the lack of knowledge and the lack of willingness to study it. Like, and no, they don't know.
Just saying, it's from my perspective,
No, I see what you mean. I'm just
from somebody who has spent a lot of time researching all these currents, like reading the materials and not just doing that, but practicing these different currents as well.
Yes.
You know, it's like I have Kabbalistic practices, I have Sufi practices, I have Christian practices, I have pagan practices. I practice this stuff, right? Yeah. It's like I don't just like read it, I don't just look at the history. It's like I see something and it resonates. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do that.
Yeah, you'd be considered a heretic though by most of those people.
Yeah, of course, but of course, yeah.
It's like a proud badge to wear. Like, no, I know exactly what you're saying. I'm saying that that's lacking in most people.
Well, what I'm saying is from that perspective. That perspective, I can see what is happening there.
You can see the threads, all the connections.
Yeah, yes, I can see the thread, and I can see that it's an evolution of man reaching towards the divine.
Right. Yes. No, I agree with you on that. Absolutely. It is this one driving force that we've had forever.
Well, it changes based. So this is so I do believe in the Prisca Theologia. I personally believe in that, even though I am armed with the perspective of knowing that everything that Marsilio Ficino considered Prisca Theologia was like what he was seeing was wrong. Them interfacing with each other. Even armed with that perspective, I still do believe in the Prisca Theologia. And the reason that I believe in the Prisca Theologia is because I believe in Platonic metaphysics.
Right.
And so if I can understand that there is this perfect essence, this perfect ideal of man's relationship with God, right, which is religion, true, honest religion, right, that is going to be dependent on time, the point in time and space. It is going to be adaptive. It is going to express itself in a different way. It is going to participate in the form of being a perfect and true religion, right? That thing that binds man to the divine. But dependent on the point in time and space is going to be imperfect.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I think religion's bullshit because all of it is. And I will stand by that because it's made up by us. It's a human construct trying to define something that's indefinable. It's trying to explain something that's inexplicable in this form. And having witnessed it myself, like I'm very sure of that. Like I know that religion is a farce. Like it is our attempt in this physical form to make sense of something that we can't as humans comprehend properly or at all, unless you experience it. And so because of that, I have not a disdain for, but like, I just don't care that much about religion because of that. Like before I used to scare me. It would scare me. Now I don't, it's not scary anymore. But before that experience I had, I would have, I gave it a lot more credit. Right. And I understand though, like if people don't have that, then of course we have to go something this like that, because at the end of the day, it's about your relationship with God. It's not something that's external, like at all, and it has nothing to do with any kind of construct. But I know that, again, that's my understanding, right? So I just find it fascinating that throughout the annals of time, that every single culture has all strived for this one understanding.
Yeah.
And I think for me, knowing what I know and having experienced what I've experienced, the occult is the closest because it's the one that puts the power directly in your hands.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's not without its flaws.
Oh, of course not.
There's a lot of flaws. I think
absolutely. But
I get I'm extremely critical of the occult.
Yeah.
You know,
I am very critical of everything. So I am too. But I mean, the idea of being in control to an extent, of your own existence, your own circumstances and stuff is definitely in line with what I experienced, like that, and have been practicing and successfully so, right? So how do we get from this over like this huge influence of religion in the occult to what we have today, which is the antithesis of religion?
Okay, so I guess coming out of the Protestant Reformation, we get into the initiatic societies, right?
Okay.
And so the initiatic societies are basically like what we start thinking of when we start thinking of the occult or magical orders or secret brotherhoods.
Like Rosicrucians?
The Rosicrucians. So the Rosicrucians start in 1614 CE. And so it's thought that the Rosicrucians were kind of like this pet project between some German men, that there wasn't actually an order. It was just a group of German men that were writing a few manifestos to convince everybody that there was this secret order. And, I guess this pet project worked because then it became the obsession of Europe, these Rosicrucians and their alchemical secrets. And it's completely shrouded in mystery and legend. And then from there, you start getting the Freemasons, which are going to be late 16th century. That's your craft masonry, and then it turns into your fellowship masonry around the 17th century,
right.
Which is basically where you start getting into the initiatic. Like, this is an esoteric society, but initiatic society or esoteric society, basically we're going to place it around 1600s. That's when they start with the Rosicrucians. Freemasons claim descendants from them, but you're going to have, different magical orders that emerge in the 19th century that are evolved off the hunting grounds of, the different Masonic lodges, right? So within an initiatic society or an esoteric society, that people in there are interested in esotericism, right? They're interested in esoterics.
Right.
So if you are a magical practitioner, you have a pretty safe bet that when you go to the lodge, you can find other people that are interested in doing magic.
I mean, I would assume.
And so you can create these like kind of splinter orders. So like with other Freemasons, like, hey, like we're both into esoterics. I practice magic. You seem like you like to do magic. Let's start our own magical order. And we already have this graded system of initiations that we can just kind of copy and paste. And this is how we start getting stuff like within the Freemasons, like the Memphis Rite, which is basically like the closest you get to magical Freemasonry. But then there's the Martinists that splinter off from the Freemasons, and they're kind of like a Christian theosophy Freemasons. But really the big one that, we're all waiting for, it starts between Mathers, Westcott, and Woodford. And it's born out of Freemasonry, and that's the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And that is the kind of like penultimate magical order that everybody thinks of when they think of occultism. But before then, there's a revolution that's happening within French occultism, right?
Right. And there absolutely is.
Yeah.
Yes. What's going on?
So the big guy's life is Levi, right? And he's a failed priest that turns occultist, and he writes this like huge syncretic masterpiece like on transcendental magic, where he just creates like the most detailed ceremonial magic that he can think of. And this inspires all the English occultists, your Mathers, your Westcott, your Woodford, and they started using him as a practical manual as Mathers mostly is designing what the magic of the Golden Dawn is going to look like. Well, Mathers is also a pretty adept translator, so he's digging around in the British libraries looking for old esoteric or magical systems or whatever, and he stumbles across John Dee and his Enochian system. And so Mathers ends up being the one that introduces Enochian to the Western lexicon. It was kind of left out of the historical record until then.
What about Agrippa?
Oh yeah, Agrippa. Yeah, Agrippa was way before that.
Yeah.
So Agrippa was Renaissance, right?
Right.
So Agrippa was either a student of or a friend of an abbot named Trithemius, but Agrippa was very much
Right. Yeah. And he got that was fantastic. I remember reading that and being like just my mind blown about how he got endorsed by the Catholic Church to do his research.
Yeah.
And they were in that letter in the letter in the first book, right? Like their correspondence was so it blew my mind because I was like, wow, that's so crazy.
He had the book for a while, and then it took him a while to get the approval from the church to publish it. Yeah, but he finally did eventually.
Yeah, with that abbot that like had his back on it too. Yeah. Like that's pretty cool. And that letter was in like the back and forth between them was that the abbot was telling him how well he had put together this argument, or this book, and how he had struggled to try to explain it before, and he is, now reading it like this is all made perfect sense. And I thought that was pretty awesome, especially since what had happened just recently prior to that, with all of the witch stuff, and like the people getting killed for for whatever they said about the church, anything outside of the practice of the Bible or the canon, right? So they're using but then for Golden Dawn, those people, these are again, it is the penultimate order, not without its problems.
Yeah, so I think famously the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, a lot of the people in the original order were disillusioned going through those initiations because they would go through this dramatic initiation. I think one was famously quoted, one of the initiates was famously quoted as like, I kept all the secrets, I did everything that I did, and all they gave me was a list of planets and told me how they related to letters.
Is that, I feel like that's the genesis of that shirt that says like, I did this and this is what I got for it, oh my God. Yeah. That's like, so that was, that's a disappointing outcome. Right? Yeah. So, why is that?
So I mean, Mathers was a systematizer, right? I mean, he was creative. Golden Dawn magic is definitely its own thing, and that was definitely a brain child of Mathers. Mathers was the creative force in the Golden Dawn, right? Sure. Woodford basically didn't do anything. No. And then Westcott was the jackass that tied them to Fräulein Sprengel. It was the reason that they all fell apart.
Right. Because like the past, systems, they point to ancient or direct transmission, right, of
Westcott,
knowledge.
So when Westcott was the progenitor. I mean, it started with Woodford, Westcott, and Mathers, but Westcott was the guy with the initial idea, and he approaches Mathers and Woodford within their Freemason club, and he says that he's got a charter from this Rosicrucian in Germany named Fräulein Sprengel to start a chapter of the Rosicrucians that's going to be called the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn or whatever. Mathers is all excited to do it. I think like Woodford was just kind of he was like older. He wasn't that much involved in it, but he was one of the founding members. Anyways, so it turns out like this Fräulein Sprengel doesn't exist. Mathers ends up finding out about it. And then he like blames Westcott and says, he told me not to tell anybody. However, towards the end of the Golden Dawn, this like scam artist couple comes to the Isis Urania Lodge in London and tells everybody that they're Fräulein Sprengel or whatever. And a bunch of people, and then they scam a bunch of people out of money, and then the entire Golden Dawn ends up in court over this. And so all these people that were in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn in Victorian society are getting put on blast in
open court
for believing in magic and being a part of a wizard club. And so they're like absolutely humiliated and ashamed. And on top of that, you know, it's like a Fraulein Sprengel.
Yeah,
really,
like it could come with a better name. Like what?
It's like oh, who gave you the chart for that? It's like, oh,
you just bought that hook, line, and sinker.
Exactly.
All good. Yeah, okay. It's very discerning.
I know,
of you, right? Jeez. Yeah, that doesn't look good at all.
Yeah,
like at all.
So it entirely fell apart because of this little lie. And it's funny though.
Little lie. Yeah.
This little lie. So this is one of the things that you're going to see throughout all of history. Every time one of these magical orders starts up, or any time one of these esoteric movements starts up, they will always start with a claim that it comes from like some kind of ascended master, right? Like basically that it is seeded by a legendary, non-provable mythic figure, and that's what lends it its authority and its legitimacy. However, so I feel like people keep doing this because they notice that part of the formula. They're like, look, we need this needs to come from we need that authority. Yeah. And they always ignore how that ends because they always ends with it blowing up in everybody's face. Yeah. Every single time.
Just like when you predict a date of something happening. It's like, good job.
I feel like people do it because people still do it today.
Yeah.
People still do it today.
Yeah.
When they try to start a magical order. And it'll be like, Golden Dawn did it. Madame Blavatsky did it. You know, like they made somebody up that like why they were able to start this movement or whatever to lend authority to it. And then they just they're like, but me, I'm not going to end. I'm not going to be,
You know who doesn't do that?
Who?
Cult leaders.
What do you mean?
They are the ones that got the information.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Well, okay, so this is different. This is the difference. So in the occult and esoterics, you need an older ancient source to lend authority to stuff. In order to start a religion, you need a direct revelation. Yeah. So these occult and esoteric movements, and it's funny too because you'll see people will get into the occult and esoterics, or want to be cult leaders get into the occult and esoterics because like I can start a cult doing this, and then they're like, wait, why isn't this working? It's like because this is a different animal. This is a different thing.
But you can't have that transmission given to you by a spirit that's ancient?
Yeah, exactly. So this is what, so when you're talking about initiatic transmission, this is where I largely deviate from the traditions. I agree with the traditionalists on a lot of things. However, I do not see how transmission cannot come from a deity or like that kind of thing. However, that transmission is deeply personal. So,
right. So it's like you're gonna have to just have blind faith.
That's just your transmission.
But I mean, you're doing that anyway.
Yeah.
By believing whatever story you're given, right? But okay, so we have Golden Dawn. It falls apart.
Yeah.
And that happens like what at the turn of the century?
Yeah, I think it's around 1902. I want to say 1902, 1903. But yeah, obviously Crowley was famously kicked out of the Golden Dawn. He got in a fight. He was, so when Mathers was being ostracized from the Golden Dawn because he was using everybody to fund his lifestyle in Paris, he was being ostracized from the Golden Dawn by the members. He sends Crowley over there to the Isis Urania Temple to get his work back.
Yeah.
And they don't let him in. I guess they get in a fight on the stairs, like a bunch of them, and they kick him down the stairs. And I'm just like,
he falls down the stairs.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, dude. And I'm just like imagining just like these like wizard dorks like in robes, like in the streets of London, just like, and it's like Aleister Crowley gets like pushed down the stairs and he's like the theater kid and he's like, you'll rule the day.
It's that South Park episode. That's what I'm seeing in my head.
Every time I read about that, it's just, I just imagine like Aleister Crowley, just like total like theater dork. Just
I do too.
Like you'll regret the day you crossed the greatest wizard.
100%. You know he did that.
Yeah,
you know he did that.
Like some guy said, he's like, get out of here, go.
Yeah, like Your sound effects have no have no pull over me.
He like swings his cape and he's like
pieces out. Yeah,
it's like
I so see that. I can see this is a great scene in my head. Yes, 100%. And then he went on to found his own.
Well, he didn't. Well, I guess so. The AA is his own. So that's his magical training school. However, the OTO. Basically, he was running around and he was like talking about. So Aleister Crowley, as much shit as I give him, he had a very wide breadth of knowledge, right?
Yeah.
So he was another great systematizer, right? So he was able to draw from a lot of different sources. Anyways, he was like really into his sex stuff or whatever, and he was talking about his sex magic secrets and this German initiatic society named the OTO got upset at them, like, you can't publish that stuff, that's our esoteric secret, right? And then he's like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't even know you guys, you know, like, I have no idea what you guys are about. He's like, this is just something that, you know, I learned from my research or whatever. So I mean, like, anytime you get into these initiatic societies or these magical orders, right, you're really dealing with people that have brought a bunch of information together with you, because these secrets are literally out there plain as day. Right. It's just you find them through studying.
Right? Or they can be serendipitous. They can be just stumble. So
the OTO basically tells Crowley to like stop giving away their sex magic secrets, and then they realize that like, God, you know what? Actually, we really like you. Why don't you run the London branch or the English branch or whatever? And then the OTO just ends up becoming Crowley's vehicle for Thelema or whatever, his initiatic society. He ends up taking the whole thing over, and the OTO falls apart after his death, but then it gets revived and reassembled a few decades later. So, well,
I'm glad that we know those rituals so that we would not. Yeah. I'm very glad. Avoid that at all costs. Yes. So now we're at that, and now that we're pretty much close to present day, right?
Yeah.
So what's going on
now? Basically, like, World War II happens, some crazy stuff happens, and then there's the 60s, 70s countercultural movement, which is basically what I say that's ground zero for the revival right now, because the 60s and 70s countercultural movement is when within the universities, college professors, they started being open to a lot more alternative ideas, started being more open to maybe exploring magic from an anthropological perspective, or exploring, obviously, the United States became really obsessed with importing Eastern practices, and it was kind of trendy within intellectual spheres in the United States to practice,
Yes, and also it was like another project of the CIA too.
Another project of the CIA.
It was to get, because they missed the whole like niche of the upper middle class white woman, like kind of vibe. They weren't part of it. So like, how do we get that? We're going to get yogis over here, and we're going to have them start to be a new age. That whole thing. Yeah. CIA. Yeah. That was where it started. And, but it didn't work. Like, it didn't work the way they wanted it to. But that was another one of those plants, that you can read about online if you were curious. But it definitely has it's become very popular and trendy. Is this where New Age comes in?
Yeah, so this is New Age. And when we were going over I literally can't talk about this without skipping over stuff. So, going back to the 17th century, we have animal magnetism and hypnotism, spiritualism that evolves into New Thought, that then evolves into the New Age. So the New Age doesn't just come out of anywhere, right? But we're here post World War II, and here comes the New Age, right? But this goes back to the 17th century. The groundwork for New Age was being laid. Sure. I just can't fit all of this. No,
it's because it's all happening at the same time, and it's like how how it really exists in reality, except the New Age is popping up. This also around the 70s, that's when quantum mysticism starts becoming a thing.
Psychedelic spirituality, you're talking about Terence McKenna,
Right.
Aldous Huxley, that kind of stuff. And then you also have Wicca, neo-paganism that emerges kind of in the 1950s with Gardner, who was basically word for word copying Aleister Crowley, but he was doing it in a way that he could be a. Whereas Crowley was a homosexual, Gardner was like
the opposite.
Yeah,
he was
like
very anti.
He was like a sex pest with women.
Yeah,
so
but he was
like,
also exclusionary.
I'm gonna do what Crowley did with gay butt sex, but I'm gonna do it with creeping on women.
Yeah. Why? It's like they're the Freuds of the occult.
Yeah.
Their sex fixations,
Yeah.
I think it's just personally, I think it's just gross. But Gardner was very like he did not he had a very strict view about that actually, and he was not allowing that in Wicca. Originally, which probably a lot of people don't know, but that is true. And he was like also, I don't know, there was some other things that were wrong with that guy. But I think anybody that's going to be heading any kind of thing like that is going to have some issues in their profile. Definitely like some kind of, I don't know, like less than savory occurrences in their life, that you could point at. I think, you can tear anyone apart, I guess, right? But that's wasn't that in the 50s?
Yeah, 1950s. That's when Wicca started. Yeah. So, I mean, it just keeps going. There's
that's a religion,
so much.
though.
Yeah, it is a religion. Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, it's kind of like a magical religion, right? So this is one of the difficult things too. It's like you can't. Aleister Crowley really wanted Thelema to be a religion, but it's a magical religion, right? And the thing is, you can't have a magical religion.
What do you mean? What about Pentecostal?
What do you mean?
You talk in tongues and stuff.
Okay, that's different.
It is? Okay.
It's completely different. Yeah.
Not to me. That's weirder.
I'm talking about, this is the issue. This is why Gnosticism lost the polemic debates.
Okay.
Why it got extinguished in polemics is because when you put an emphasis on people's access to spirituality and esotericism, you're like, what do we know about esotericism? It is obfuscated by motivation, right? And not everybody possesses that motivation.
Right.
So this is why exoteric, accessible religions always win over esoteric ones, right?
Yeah.
So with Aleister Crowley, very vainly wanted Thelema to overtake Christianity, but he packed it with so much complex esotericism that he completely drove away anybody that doesn't have the motivation to decode his insane ramblings, right? And this is exactly what happened with Gnosticism. Like Gnosticism, it placed an emphasis on, it is up to you to escape the material, and if you can't do it, you're a hylic. You're made of matter. You don't have a soul. Ooh, right? Nice. So yeah, you would love Gnosticism.
I'm like thinking to myself, that's like the NPCs I talk about all the time.
It is. So they call the NPCs you talk about, they call them hylics.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard me use that word before?
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
Yes, I do believe that.
You would love Gnostics. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I'm telling you, there are people walking around right now that do not have soul. I'm dead serious. Like yeah, man. Like you know them when you see them.
This emphasis on that, like you have to take like personal responsibility, like this doesn't appeal to everybody.
No, absolutely not. That's
why magical religions don't work. It's like if you have a religion that is dependent on magical practice, a magical practitioner by definition is, doing something experimental, right? They're experimenters. Not everybody's an experimenter. You can't place that onus on people. That's why magical religions don't work.
Okay.
If you want to start a religion, don't make it magic. But also, if you want to be a cult leader, don't start an occult order, right? Because those are all independent thinkers.
For the most part,
For the most part, yes.
For the most part. I mean, maybe these days it might be a little different with a lot of the kids getting into it, like really from TikTok and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a whole. And then now, what about the online occult?
The online occult, I mean, that's going to have to be its own
that's
episode.
where we're at, though, right now.
That's where it's at. And that actually might be a great place to end so that we can talk about that in the next episode. Online occultism. Has anybody done that yet?
Yeah, I'm working. Remember, that was like my first dissertation idea that I had.
Yeah, I know that. But that's what I'm saying. Like, nobody's like,
I didn't do it.
About it.
changed it.
We should do it
to egregores because I was like, this is too much. It's just.
I don't think it's too much. I was there.
Oh yeah, no, you were. Like, so I wasn't.
I had Vietnam flashbacks. Like, I'm like it's like I can see the bombs dropping. You know, like, yeah.
I mean, that's amazing. Yeah. So we're very lucky right now that we have this access that we have.
Yeah.
You know, but again, with like everything, with good comes bad. So
yeah,
I guess we should definitely do it on that.
That's a great. I honestly thought this was going to be a 2-parter.
Yeah.
You know,
but this is foundational. I think this is good. I think this is a lot to digest.
Like, I didn't even scratch.
No, I know
the fucking surface. So
dude. Legitimately, he's being dead serious. Like, not at all. Like, because I have seen the amount of, oh my gosh, yes, no. But I think for the beginner, for someone that's wanting to just delve in, it is up to them to look into it. So here's the starting points.
Yeah, those are the starting points. Those are the big ones, right? Yeah. If you're going to look at the 3 movements from Hellenism, and then you look at the evolution of Christianity, what it was rejecting, how it was infighting, and then you look at the initiatic societies, you can usually place yourself somewhere, place your magic somewhere, and you can explore around it, and you can look for the influences.
Exactly. Right? And then you can come to your own understanding and gnosis of the whole situation based on those starting points. Like, definitely. I mean, I think that's this is much more helpful than trying to put together. How many books did you have to read to get all that information?
I don't know.
A lot.
I've been,
You just already have it up
doing this for,
I know. Like, so it's a benefit.
I've been doing this. I've been trying to trace these threads since I first got into the occult. You know, that's over a decade ago.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that's well, I appreciate this sharing of this information with us, because you know it's hard to find it consolidated like that.
I mean,
in a coherent way.
I'm still not happy. Every time I try to do this, I always just feel so dumb.
Oh my God. No, like, I think that people listening are like, oh my gosh, like, because it's a lot.
It is a lot. It's hard to make
that's
sense
like months and months of study. Maybe
months
years.
and months. No, that's years. That's years and years and years. I'm telling you, I mean, trying to get into like what exactly happened. Hellenism is the hardest part, but like, when I discovered where it all went in the caliphate, like, that's when my world got rocked, because I had been hunting for that thread for a long time. And then when it finally started like clearing up, it's like Neoplatonism, and it goes into the caliphate. And then I was like, oh my God.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's the thing that I just want to like just emphasize, the fact that when you do this stuff, you will have those moments where something clicks for you.
Yeah.
And there's like no substitution for that. Like, when you are able to like have some kind of,
it's like being able to visualize it. Like, you get this, like it's like I can see the timeline. I can see the influences. I can see the evolution of ideas. And I know that I'm like saying these words that mean nothing to anybody who doesn't care about them, you know, but I think that the more that you're exposed to them, and the more that you hear about this stuff, the more that picture starts to
and then you start, when you get that one piece, then you start to notice all of the ripple effects of it throughout everything that you've already experienced, and then in your future experiences too. And it's very validating.
It's a practice. I mean, like, you laughed earlier when it was like, when you really look at it, it's this collaborative effort, right? But I mean, like,
you're right. That's why I laughed, because
it's this like mystic kind of oneness that you start to approach when you look at, you know, exactly what's happening.
Well, you're right, because you're actually right. Something just dawned on me that I was looking at it too literally. Like, I just got this right now. So you just unlocked something for me. I was looking at it too literally, looking at the historical events rather than the purpose of it. So, like, the purpose was all one.
Yeah.
The purpose has been one. Yeah. Just like the other things that go on around it.
This is why I believe in the Prisca Theologia.
Got it.
Marsilio Ficino, you know, and I mean, this is what we learned from, you know, a lot of times these things come out of either ignorance or mistakes,
right? Or the filtering programming that we're taught.
The filtering, yeah. So
lovely. Yeah. I mean, no, I just got that. Like, that just hit for me. So, see, it can happen just as simple as just hearing it. So, thanks. That just totally makes sense now. It didn't before. I'm going to be honest. I was like, what are you talking about? But now don't know. That was just somehow that managed to
Yeah.
work for me. So thank you.
So I think I would encourage anybody that is out there listening to this to get a little more in touch with the history of your magical practice and look for the wizards that influenced your favorite wizards, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Find the genesis of the
Find the
thing that you
genesis.
like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or the closest to genesis that you can.
So this is why I really like reading. I like paying attention to what happens in academia with the study of our tradition
Yeah.
because, those people are really good at providing their sources. And
Yes,
that's
they
a
are. So
great
it's required.
way. That's a
Yeah.
great way to get your hands on some tomes.
It is.
Yeah,
It is. So
yeah.
if you go to the bibliographies or the referenced works of any other research that's done or papers that are written, yes, absolutely. That's a really good.
Yeah.
Um,
Find the best deep cuts that way.
yeah. And then they've consolidated it for you and like simplified it, but now you can go dig deeper in it, right?
Yeah.
To verify
And
yourself.
so the book that I would definitely recommend for anybody that would like to follow along or maybe find a bibliography to get more in touch to research these currents is going to be Western Esotericism, A Guide for the Aplex by Wouter Hanegraaff. You should be able to find it. He's a pretty popular person. So
a popular or infamous?
Infamous, maybe.
Yeah, no, within his
people don't
circles.
like him. Yeah.
But hey, you're not doing it right if you don't have haters.
Yeah, 100%. That is the most 2000s thing you've ever said.
I know, man. You're welcome.
That's great, dude.
Flashbacks.
Yeah, I know. Let's bring it back.
Yeah,
All right.
I have it. All right. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you. You've been listening to Discourse, where we venture into the mysteries of esotericism, the occult, and the depths of spiritual exploration. I am Abammon the Great, joined as always by Dr. Anna Stone, bringing the insights of both practitioner and scholar to guide your journey. Remember, the path of wisdom is illuminated by both knowledge and experience, and each step brings new discoveries. Until next time, continue your exploration and stay attuned to the unseen.